Hello! In a previous demo, we showed you how to use UXsheets for the end-user interface for an expense report application in ServiceNow. In this demonstration, we're going to show you how we set that up in a very, very short period of time. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come here as an administrator and I'm going to go to the template designer. Now, we launched a full window for the real estate, but we're in ServiceNow. UXsheets is a 100% ServiceNow application. So let's bring up our templates, and we can see the expense report templates that we saw earlier, but we want to create a new one from scratch. So I'm going to hit New, and we're in the expense report application that remembers it, and we're going to choose the expense report table. And then I'm going to call this Demo Expense Report. And let's go ahead and grab that expense report application. And that application, again, is an Excel spreadsheet that we were using beforehand. Matter of fact, this is what it looks like in Excel. We're just going to bring it up into our application, and we're going to pick some sample data. Matter of fact, let's pick that sample data we used for that last demonstration. And let's create this template. Now, when I brought this template up, it looks really nice. It's exactly the same as Excel as we saw. But if we publish this, the user can just see this and they can't do anything with it. So let's go ahead and start doing some of that mapping. And UXsheets has a patent pending mapping technology that allows UXsheets to use a spreadsheet interface as a user interface to data in ServiceNow. So we're going to do this by right-clicking and choosing Create Record Mapping on this first cell where the name should be. Now these are all the fields on the expense report table. So we're going to pick Name, and we're going to map it. And you can even see we pulled in that mapping, and we've gone to a green background to show you record mappings. And we need now to map the employee. So I'm going to right-click on the cell here and say Create Record Mapping. But this time we've already highlighted employee because we saw the label over here and matched it up to the label on that field. So there, we use that for really quick auto mapping capabilities to help make this process very, very quick and easy. And if you needed to, you can actually pull in related information through to related fields like this employee if we needed to, but we're not going to do that for this example. So we're just going to say the employee, and that's the employee field on the expense report application, and we need to remember that for later on. And now we're going to pick up this one. We're going to right-click and say Submit Expenses, and it's auto-map too. Matter of fact, I'm going to pick up all these ones that are auto-mapped because it's just very, very quick for me to go do that. And this, in a few seconds here, we'll get all these mapped up. We'll go down to Advances down here, map that one. We even handle this weird field down here. We'll say Create Record Mapping here, and it went to Notes. That's awesome. We're picking it all up. That's great. Now let's take a look at total here. Total we need to have mapped. I'm going to say Create Record Mapping. Now we did auto map it, but now notice up here it said mapping type, to record only or bidirectional. And we detected that it was a formula. And when we detect a formula, we're going, hey, don't overwrite formulas. The formula is the master of the data. So now we're going to push up that data into that appropriate field in our records. So this way we can use the complex complex mapping engine that's available in the spreadsheet as the master of data for these types of fields. So total gets pushed up, it's went green. Let's go ahead and do subtotal. We can't auto map it because subtotal field is way over here, but again, it's to record only. So we just did all the field records on the expense application record in our application, and this is really, really quick to go do. Well, now we need to go do this area in here, and let's take a look at it. We have this hugely complex formula for the totals, okay, and we'll come to that in just a minute. But we need to have that all mapped over in here, and everything else looks the same. So let's go ahead and grab that entire area, highlight it, and let's come up into the Designer tab, and let's select, well, expenses per day. So that's all of our expenses per day. This is the only relationship that we find on that table. So that makes it pretty easy. Let's just select that. And hey, look at that. We looked at the headers on each one of those columns, and we auto-mapped each one of those columns for you. We even detected that the total is a formula. You can see that highlighted up over here. And we're going to push that data back up. So let's go ahead and sort it by the date. Now we got some other options down here. We're going to say expand the table as necessary and allow for deletion of records. Also allow for inserting of new records and adding new rows at the end of the table. Well, what does all that means? So first of all, well, you see all the data that came in, but let's say instead of having just 5 here, we have room for what, 10? What happens if there's 11 line items? Well, we need that table to be auto-expanded. What happens if we had 10 here, we added another line? We need to right-click down here and say add a new row, and it needs to be mapped back to the data. So that's what it's going to go do. So we'll use blank areas for inserts because of that one flag being set. We'll allow them to delete a record by right-clicking and deleting it. So you have full control of how much you want the user to do inside this table. But now notice one other thing. Our totals are wrong. Why are our totals wrong? What's going on with this? Well, if you look at this, it's saying, hey, if I7 is less than the max transportation, then use whatever's in I7. Otherwise, only use the max transportation cost. Well, what is max transportation? Let's right-click here and say named ranges and say, hey, there's max transportation. Well, what is that? I clicked on it, and now notice that we actually highlighted the field over here on the second sheet underneath the support. There's a max transportation cost. So this row here is going to allow us to specify what the maximum is for each one of those columns for the user. Well, cool. Well, how do we get data in here? Well, let's quickly take a look. Let's go over to max expenses by department, and there's a table in our application that has all the maximum expenses per department, and we need to pull that data in here. In a traditional spreadsheet application, I'd have to have all this hard-coded inside my spreadsheet in another tab, do an HLOOKUP, and it gets kind of complex and gnarly to go do. Well, with UXsheets, this becomes a lot cleaner and easier to go do. What we really want to do is pull in IT, because that's what the system administrator is who submitted that, or whatever. We'll see that in just a second, whoever that user is. But we just need one of these lines to be pulled in there. So let's go do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this area that we want the data to come into, and we're going to do the same thing we did before, map tables. But right now, we're not going to use this related list. We're going to do a custom query, and we're going to go to max expenses by department. So these are all the tables that we found in the expense report application. We're going to select max expenses by department. And look, it automatically went through and found us all the matching columns for us. And I selected department so we can see the department in it. But we need to pull in a department. And remember when I said we needed to remember a field? Well, that was the employee. So what it is that there is a department field in this record of max expenses by department. So we want a department to be equal to something. So we say department. We want it to be equal to what? Well, I'm going to put in 2 curly braces, and I'm going to say employee. That was on the top level record, which was in the expense report application, had an employee field. And that employee field has a department. So we want the employee's department. So we want this line to only have the max expenses for department where the department is equal to the employee's department. Wow, that is so easy. We're also going to just guarantee that we only get one. We should only ever have one, but it's always nice to make sure that we only have one. And don't expand, don't allow them edit, deleting, or anything else like that. So we're just going to map it and take a look at our totals now. We actually have totals that we're expecting. And the sales user, I said IT earlier, but the sales user is the sales department. So when we click over here, we should see sales. Wow. This is all working. Again, I can go publish this at this point in time, but it's all read-only by default. Well, how do I know it's read-only? Is if I come up over here in the designer, we say the sheet is protected. And by default, everything's protected. You have to unprotect stuff. If I unprotect this, then everything's writable, but that's not what we want either. Also, all of the stuff that we're wanting to save is maps. So we're going to say save only map data. And we can also show how much of this panel we want the end user to have. So let's go ahead and just say that we want to have the view panel so we can see what that looks like. Now, I'm going to hit OK. So if the sheet's protected, how do we unprotect the different areas? So let's take a look and see what is protected. Remember, I said everything was protected. That is true. If I look here and I click on this protection toggle protection view, anything that's not protected, everything that's protected is grayed out. And we can see that everything is grayed out. So we need to ungray things. So I'm going to ungray it by unprotecting a selection. So I right-clicked up here on this sales user, which was the name, and unprotected it. I'm going to do the same for the SMID expense report. I'm not going to do it for the rest of this because I don't want them to be able to go change any of this. I'm going to say that they need to be able to input stuff in for advances and also for the notes. Well, that's pretty dang easy. However, what about all this stuff in this table? How do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple also. I'm going to right-click in the table and say unprotect the entire table. Now, everything is unprotected. That's almost what I want because I don't want them to be able to change the totals because that's a formula. I don't want people to say how much they're going to be paid other than filling in the appropriate information over here. So I'm going to right-click here and say protect the selection. So now everything's unprotected in the table on the column-wise, except for this column here is now protected. And that's it. So now I'm going to save it, and then we can go in and take a look at this. Let's go test this. So let's go to expense reports, and let's say new expense report. And this uses the last one that we created. And we can see that because we can't change the administrator, we can't change draft, but we can change here. Wow, that's pretty cool. Let's go put in some big values for breakfast, lunch, dinner, miles. Look what happens to our total. We're not getting paid everything that we're asking for, but we are getting paid. So that means on the second page, there it is, IT, and they have a different cap for each one of those different areas. So this spreadsheet is working as we anticipated. And if I didn't spend so much time explaining to you what we're going to go do, we could have put this together in about 5 minutes or less. Hope you enjoyed this presentation, and thank you very much.